Hey there, Razorback Nation, college football fans. Today, I'm going to break down this weekend's top 10 matchup between the Arkansas Razorbacks and the Bulldogs of Georgia. First, I guess let me start off by saying after going back and watching Georgia's game against Clemson and the first 3 quarters of their game against South Carolina on tape, as one would expect, this is the best team Arkansas has faced all season. When you sit and watch this Bulldogs team, there are no glaring weaknesses like there were, for example, with Texas and Texas A&M. I think anyone with relatively good knowledge of the game could have sat and studied Texas and Texas A&M and identified the fact that their weak points were their offensive line and their rush defense. Georgia, however, as I just mentioned, does not have any of those weaknesses that just jump out at you on film. With that said, an area I think that could benefit Arkansas in this matchup is the level of competition these two teams have played. With all due respect to Georgia's first 4 opponents, none of them appear to be even half as good as this Razorbacks team. Now, Clemson's defense, in my opinion, is elite, but as we've seen through the first 4 weeks as a whole, they are not. And granted that it was week 1 and Georgia has had time to work on some things and improve, that same Clemson defense that gave up only 3 points to this Georgia offense, I believe is pretty comparable to this Razorback defense they'll see on Saturday. If you want to, as I probably would, give Clemson's defense a slight edge over Arkansas, once again it comes down to the fact that Arkansas is still clearly the superior team overall. On the Georgia side of things, once again, I go back to the fact this is definitely the best team Arkansas has faced all year as well. In every aspect, at every position, it will be the biggest test Arkansas has had. Offensively for Georgia, obviously they've got a good offensive line, a great stable of backs. There's really no skill position players on this team that aren't capable of making plays and breaking tackles if you don't wrap them up. In any game, being assignment sound and making sure you don't have a lot of missed tackles is crucial, but especially so in a game against a team like this. Let me say that whatever Barry Odom decides to do schematically, I'm not going to question it. Obviously, he's probably going to have some wrinkles built in for this one, some things to confuse the offense and create favorable matchups for his guys. But one thing in particular I definitely think we'll see is at least one additional man in the box. As anybody who has watched Arkansas this season probably realizes, typically Arkansas lines up with only 5 men in the box, 3 down defensive linemen, and 2 linebackers. I think that will change against this Georgia team based upon the challenges Georgia's offense presents as far as their offensive line and running backs. I do think you will consistently see at least 6 in the box in this one. Well, I'm out of time, and that seems like a decent enough stopping point, so I'll continue the rest of my breakdown into part 2. Hey there, Razorback Nation, college football fans. This is part 2 of my breakdown of this weekend's top 10 matchup between the Arkansas Razorbacks and the Bulldogs of Georgia. To kind of pick up where I left off in part 1, I'm going to talk about the particular challenge that JT Daniels presents against this Razorback defense that they really haven't seen this season. Something I think Daniels does a much better job of than the other quarterbacks Arkansas has faced this season is taking what the defense gives him. He's very willing to just be methodical in the passing game, take the short routes, take the checkdowns, not just because he's under pressure and panicking in the pocket, but because he understands his role and that he needs to trust his guys to make plays after the catch. With that said, it does really seem like Odom is going to need to send more blitzes and more pressure than he has in the first 4 games. He's going to have to send more than 3 pass rushers consistently in order to ensure that Daniels isn't sitting comfortably in that pocket, that he is feeling the pressure of that pocket collapsing, and that he does have that mental clock going off in the back of his head. He's obviously not much of a threat running the football, but you can't just let him sit in the pocket and pick you apart. Thankfully, I think Arkansas does have the personnel, the depth, and the scheme to make things harder on him, to keep him thinking while he is in the pocket. With that, I guess I'll transition into what I think KJ and this Razorbacks offense needs to do against Georgia and their stout defense. Once again, as I mentioned in part 1, there's no glaring weaknesses with this Georgia defense. They're obviously very talented and good at every level. But one thing I noticed in the Clemson game and a little bit in the South Carolina game is that a good portion of the time, Georgia would rush 4 and drop the rest of their defenders back in pass coverage. Well, when they would do that, there were a lot of running lanes for the quarterback that DJ Uiagalelei simply did not take advantage of. I'll quickly say in DJ's defense, he did not get much help at all from the guys around him, but in that game, he did look like a deer in headlights. You could tell that the moment just seemed too big for him. Clemson's offensive line just simply wasn't very good, so they were unable to establish really anything at all in the run game. But as I just mentioned, if DJ would have been more composed, if he would have been looking for it, there were certainly opportunities for him to make plays with his legs, which is certainly something I think KJ Jefferson has to be willing and ready to do in this matchup. Because when you're passing the ball against this Georgia defense, you're going to have about 2.5 seconds to either get the ball out of your hands or take off running. Even if he doesn't do it and ends up being able to attack for a good amount of yardage to the air, I think he almost needs to come into this game with the mindset of, I'm going for over 100 yards on the ground today. He's absolutely got to make this Georgia defense fear him running the ball so that he can open up some things for other guys. Well, I'm going to leave off there because that's all the time I have for part 2. I should be able to finish the remainder of the breakdown in part 3. Hey there, Razorback Nation college football fans. This is part 3 of my breakdown of this weekend's top 10 matchup between the Arkansas Razorbacks and the Bulldogs of Georgia. At the end of part 2, I was discussing what KJ Jefferson in particular needs to do against this Georgia defense. So to start part 3, I'll kind of continue to elaborate upon that. I mentioned KJ and his legs and the fact he's going to have to get the ball out of his hands quick and make quick decisions, because when you're passing the ball against this Georgia defense, you got roughly 2.5 seconds before they're either hitting you or at least getting pressure. I talked about how JT Daniels is good at being methodical with the football, taking what the defense gives him and knowing when to take the strike downfield. And that's an area KJ himself has continued to improve upon, and an area I think he'll need to be really solid in this one. He needs to be calm and composed and once again be able to make those quick reads and decisions and use what JT Daniels doesn't have, which is that God-given size and speed. As I alluded to in part 1, something that I think benefits Arkansas is that they have played better competition to this point. They are more battle-tested. So if you're an Arkansas fan, there's that hope that maybe they can use that to their advantage. Maybe they can catch Georgia off guard or sleeping a little bit, given the fact that Arkansas is a tier or two above any other competition they've played this season. Apart from that Clemson defense, which I previously mentioned is pretty comparable to this Razorback defense, Georgia hasn't been pushed. They haven't, once again, been tested this season, especially defensively. And that's not a knock against Georgia. That's not to say that they're not that elite defense and team that everybody believes them to be. It's simply to say just that they haven't received that quality test yet. And Arkansas, on the other hand, has faced two teams that, while not as good as Georgia, obviously, are still two quality opponents. How much of a difference will that really make, or how much of a factor will that truly play? I don't know, but it is something to consider. I think I would be a bit hard-pressed to pick Arkansas over Georgia in this ballgame, especially with the Bulldogs being at home. But after having seen and studied both these teams, I think Arkansas's chances are substantially better than what the national perception seems to be. The last I seen, the line for this game was Arkansas plus 18. And I'm no betting man, but I'd say Arkansas plus the points is easy money. The absolutely only scenario I see Arkansas losing by plus 18 points is if they come out and execute the way they did the first 2.5 quarters against Rice in Game 1. I expect a physical, intense street fight between these two teams, but Georgia's advantage and overall depth could have the final say. Well, that's all for now. Thank you guys for your time. Please leave any thoughts, opinions, or suggestions you have in the comments section. Until next time, I pray you all stay safe and well, and whoop-ee! Go Hogs!